All right. Well, thank you for spending your lunchtime with us on this Tuesday, or if you're watching the recording later on. We're going to jump right in. We have 50 minutes together. My name is Natalie Sampson. I co-lead the Community Engagement Core for our Michigan Center on Life Stage Environmental Exposures and Disease, also known as the M-LEEaD Center. This work is supported by a National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences P30 grant. And I really just want to emphasize that the work that we do is really about connecting communities, youth, policymakers, researchers around environmental health and justice issues. And so this is guided by a stakeholder advocacy board with members from Eastside Community Network, Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice, the Detroit Health Department, the State Health Department, Sierra Club, We the People Detroit, Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation, Ecology Center, Chas Center, and the Green Door Initiative. So thank you all for taking time to join us. This is part of a series we like to call Residents and Researchers, and we'll share the link to past videos. We've done a lot of different sessions covering topics from gentrification to healthcare waste to water affordability. And today we're really excited to talk with Christy McGillivray from the Sierra Club about data centers and what they have to do with environmental health. And so Christy is a political and legislative director for the Sierra Club in Michigan. She's worked on issues including PFAS, forever chemicals, the transition to electric vehicles in the context of labor and climate change, and many, many other pressing issues that we're facing today. And so I'm going to hand it off, and Christy's going to steal the show for most of our time together, but we're going to make sure we have some time at the end, 10 or 15 minutes, hopefully, to do some Q&A. I know lots of folks are interested in this topic, and there's a lot of questions about what's going on and where we're at and policy and science-wise, and so we'll try to leave some space for that. Please feel free at any point to start throwing those questions in the Q&A or the chat, and I will track on those when we come back together. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Christy. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I am going to say hello and go off camera because I'm worried about my Wi-Fi not performing. So hi, and I will now go off video. So as the political and legislative director for Sierra Club, I got roped into the debate about data center impacts in an effort to defend our clean energy package and the renewable energy generation goals that we have as a part of our renewable energy package here in Michigan. So that's how I got sucked into it, and we're going to get into the details of artificial intelligence's real world impact and why this relates to Sierra Club stuff. So yeah, ask questions as we go along, and I will, if there's a question that I cannot answer, I will endeavor to find someone who can answer it for you and get back with you. All right, so let's go to the first slide. Okay, so I'm going to be covering specifically what data centers are. There have been some pretty big technological shifts recently that is affecting what they are. We're mainly concerned about data center impacts on ratepayers, energy use, and water use. I will be covering some solutions at the end. We can develop artificial intelligence responsibly. We don't have to continue on the current trajectory that we're on. Yeah, we'll talk about the context for all this stuff and how it's shaping up. Okay, so let's get started. Next slide. You got to go forward one more minute. There you go. Okay, so data centers. A way of thinking about them, they are the big server farms that create the cloud, right? And there are actually several different kinds. There are enterprise data centers, which can host multiple corporate entities that are using the space, and they need the storage. They're the real concrete brick and mortar places that help create the volume of data and computational power that we need for our digital lives, right? So as long as the internet and computers have been a part of our life, we've had data centers. And they've changed, though, with the advent of artificial intelligence. And this is a photo of the Switch data center that is in the old Steelcase building in Grand Rapids. So they tend to be clustered in specific areas because companies need to actually be physically close to them in a lot of cases. So once you have data center development in one particular area, it tends to cluster there. And we'll get into exactly where they are in Michigan right now, too. Okay, next slide. So what's changed? We are not just using data centers for cloud storage. We are now actually developing large language models and artificial intelligence through data centers. The actual number crunching and all the ones and zeros that are coming together to build various different artificial intelligences, all of that's actually happening in data centers. That's where it's going on. So they do have very real world needs. Data centers consume massive amounts of water for cooling, and they use massive amounts of electricity, especially the new development, the artificial intelligence that's proprietary, right? So the hyperscale data centers, those are the new ones on the horizon. They're substantively different than the enterprise data centers, which have been the massive server farms that different companies rented out, right? So you have singular companies, like for example, Microsoft is building these proprietary large language model the data centers that are doing all the computational stuff necessary. And to give you an idea of the scale of the amount of electricity that these facilities use, 3 Mile Island, which is the nuclear plant that melted down in the late 70s, Microsoft is restarting 3 Mile Island, and all of the electricity that they are planning on generating from a nuclear power plant is going to go towards their AI that they're building out. We're seeing a similar kind of power draw in other parts of the country as well, and we'll get into that. But it's truly, there's no sector right now that uses a similar amount of electricity. And this is a problem, right? As we are needing to generate more electricity to electrify and move away from burning various kinds of gas, we need to make sure that we're generating electricity as cleanly as possible. And the massive rush right now between tech companies that are competing with each other are bringing more fossil fuels online at the exact time that we should be cutting emissions. So it's this shift in the sheer volume of electricity that large language models really need. That is why it's such a big concern. Okay, next slide. So the argument for why we need to incentivize data centers coming to various states is that the amount of corporate taxes that tech companies are going to pay justify the burden that's placed on ratepayers for water and electricity use. And the argument we hear all the time is that, tech company X coming into Berrien County is going to, save this school district, right? That practice has actually been belied by the pattern of the way that tax loopholes have actually been exploited by data centers to date. So I think the switch case study is really important. It's a Michigan case study. We can look at it specifically. The sales and use tax exemption for data centers was passed in 2015, specifically actually for Switch. And they got 100% personal property tax exemption after they got the sales and use tax exemption. So companies will come in and they will layer different tax incentives in order to get out of paying really what they owe to various communities. It had such a negative impact on the local school district that the Caledonia School District in Kent County went to court over it. And because Switch was refusing to pay local taxes, on top of that, their justification for why they needed the sales and use tax exemption in the first place was that they were going to hire so many high-paying tech jobs, and it was going to be an absolutely, amazing job creation push in Kent County. The reality is that through layering different tax exemptions at the state and city level, Switch managed to get about a 70% tax break, and they are in fact not hiring thousands of workers with very high-paying jobs. They only have the data that we most recently had. They've got 43 workers and they're making less than $20 an hour. So the reason I think it makes sense to dig into some of the numbers behind the tax breaks for these facilities is because on top of not meeting our climate goals, on top of using so much water, the justification that these are going to be really good neighbors that help drive investment in communities is belied by how they've actually behaved when they are in local communities. They're pushing for more tax breaks. They are not revitalizing schools. It's a problem. All right, next slide. So we currently have 52 data centers operating across Michigan and the Lower Peninsula. I think it's helpful to highlight this for folks because there's sometimes a perception that these are new and we don't want them coming here. They're already here. They're functionally, the nervous system of the internet. So this is about where they're located now, although there tends to often be, secrecy around it. Switch is expanding in Gaines Township. Microsoft is expanding in Kent County as well. That's in part because, late last year, the legislature did move the sales and use tax exemptions, which we're going to get into. And Switch, as we talked about, as kind of the original company that pushed for the sales and use tax exemptions back in 2015. And I don't know if they've officially gone public yet, but they were about to go public with an offer of $40 billion. So the tech sector is very interested in coming to this part of the country in order to continue building out data centers, in part because our summers are more mild and keeping these facilities cool is really tough for them. And as mentioned, they use a ton of water. So we have, 52 data centers right now. We might wind up with more. We'll see. And the Bell River gas plant down in Port Huron, we know for a fact that DTE right now is actually trying to bring a data center to that part of the state specifically because they overbuilt that gas plant. So that's one of the things that we're trying to take into account and make sure that we're not even overbuilding fossil fuels and trying to attract massive users because they've been overbuilt. So that's kind of the status right now of where we are. Next slide. So when I first started doing this presentation, it was in the summer of last year because that's when we were fighting really hard to make sure that any tax breaks for data centers took into account ratepayer protections, water conservation, and energy conservation. And this, the second headline here is from The Guardian, and it's also from this winter. And it was some reporting that The Guardian did on the discrepancy between the actual emissions associated with the AI race and big tech's claims. And part of the reason why there's that massive discrepancy is because big tech is not, those are the really big players. So they're not transparent at all about how much actual energy they use and how much water they use. And so even tracking down and quantifying what they're actually using can be tough. And it's really helpful to have reporters out there working to get their hands on that information. So where we're at, we passed the sales and use tax exemptions without the guardrails that we wanted. That was happened here in Michigan. States are going to be stepping up and doing more. We're seeing legislation pop up in Colorado and Virginia, Montana, South Dakota, Hawaii, New Mexico. They're looking at both regulating how AI is used, and especially in Oregon, they're really concerned about dealing with ratepayer impacts. So for example, in Oregon, I believe that utility bills have been going up by 50% over the past 5 years, and it's really harming consumers. And Oregon is finally looking at reining in the ways that, in this case, it's specifically, I believe it's Google, has been able to manipulate the Public Service Commission in Oregon to get a lower rate that leaves residents footing the bill for the infrastructure that tech needs to run their data centers. And that's exactly what's going to wind up happening in Michigan too. Okay, next slide. All right, so we're going to talk energy, water, and ratepayers. Those are our big concerns. I really encourage people to look at other AI impacts outside of those three categories as well. So there's, big concerns about how AI will be used to profile people, how it could be used to deny people services, and all sorts of mental health impacts that could be associated with our ongoing quest to, warp reality here and there. So, but we're just going to focus on these three. Next slide. So I've made this point, and we're going to keep going back to it. Tech companies are not paying for their infrastructure. It is ratepayers that are paying for it. And we have a solid paper trail backing this up, and that it's coming from both filings with public service commissions and contested rate cases. And, we see exactly how these facilities are operating in other states. So we know how this is going. Coal plants are staying online, so we're paying with our health. The water use is completely out of control, especially with massive data centers that are operating in the Southwest. There's serious strains on water supplies, higher utility bills, and obviously when you're bringing massive users like this, again, remember Microsoft's AI that they're going to be powering by restarting 3 Mile Island. That's an absolutely massive amount of electricity. So that kind of draw coming online fast leads to grid instability. So it's a problem. It's a really serious problem. We are subsidizing in so many different ways tech's own internal arms race with each other, right? Okay, next slide. So I just added this slide today, so thanks for your patience. But I mentioned that bill that's moving in Oregon. Oregon is one of the states that started attracting data centers sooner than other states, which makes sense, right? It's over on the West Coast, and they've got some tech hubs there. So the impact in Oregon has been pretty extreme. And I think that this quote from the president of the Citizens Utility Board there in Oregon is just, really sums it up. He's pointing out that the amount of resources being consumed by a single customer group has never happened before. This is really unprecedented. And everything that goes into the volume of water and energy that they're using requires infrastructure. And the lawyers that are working for these tech companies are very good at making sure that all of those costs are passed on to everyone paying their water bill, everyone paying their gas bill, everyone paying their electrical bill, and instead of the tech companies themselves. And it is incredibly expensive to build out that kind of infrastructure. It's the equivalent of building out the infrastructure for entire cities, but the tech companies aren't paying for it. Instead, regular ratepayers are. So I just wanted to make sure that we got that in there. Okay, next slide. So this is just a snapshot across the country. We're going to start seeing this in Michigan too. I'll get to that. But just across the lake in Wisconsin, 2 new massive gas-fired power plants are coming on. It's going to cost over $1 billion, and that cost is going to be passed along to ratepayers. That was just announced. One of them is also, and I think this is important, at the Foxconn site. And for folks that may not be aware, Foxconn was the company that was supposed to, so I think they were going to manufacture like LED TV screens or something. But that particular location, it's in Waukesha. That's where the first major water diversion outside of the Great Lakes watershed was approved. And it was kind of one of the first big tests of the Great Lakes Compact. And that city straddles the watershed. So the water draw coming in Wisconsin for these data centers is going to be water that is leaving the Great Lakes watershed. And so that's pretty significant and important. So the diversion of water in Wisconsin for those hyperscale facilities it's at a location that has some pretty important historical precedent for Great Lakes water management. So it's a good thing to know. Georgia is another state that has rolled out the red carpet for data centers. Bipartisan work went into a push in the Georgia state legislature last year to roll back their sales and use tax incentives. And there were floor speeches being given by Republicans arguing that these sales and use tax exemptions were a terrible return on investment because they were not actually contributing to local economic growth, and instead everyone else's bills were going up. Georgia's had very serious issues with air quality and diesel generators running around the clock, and also more water use concerns. The governor of Georgia wound up vetoing the rollback of the sales and use tax incentives, which is interesting. But the problem has definitely not gone away, and the Utility Commission in Georgia is scrambling to figure out how to maintain reliability for regular folks while dealing with the data center expansion. Ohio has also rolled out the red carpet for data centers. The thing that I think really stands out about Ohio is that the tech companies in Ohio, in their proceedings with the Utility Commission, actually went as far as to insist that an adjudicated decision had already been reached when it hadn't. And the Utility Commission basically had to tell the tech companies that were intervening in that case that their lawyers submitting their opinion was not actually a judge's final decision, and an administrative law judge would actually be looking at rate structures in order to hold tech companies more accountable than they currently are. That was pretty bold of the tech companies in Ohio to try that one. And yeah, I think again, like the pattern is clear: massive amounts of electricity coming online, huge draw, ratepayer impacts. And I want to mention, we've got Nebraska here. We're seeing reports, in other parts of the country as well. There's a quote from a woman, Cheryl Weston. She's been advocating for years to get a coal plant closed down. It was slated to be closed down. It's staying open because new data centers coming online need the electricity. So that's not just happening in Nebraska, it's happening in other parts of the country as well. Obviously, I don't need to tell anyone who's in this session how catastrophically terrible it is to keep burning coal to build out AI as the climate crisis escalates. And it's particularly tough for people living close to these facilities because they obviously have to deal with the fallout of air pollution from that. I didn't mention here, but the diesel generators that tech companies will hook up to data centers as backup generators are a serious source of concern. They'll hook up thousands of them because while they're building these large language models, they can't afford to ever have electricity go off. So the diesel generators are supposed to be there in case of a catastrophic weather event, or for whatever reason, power goes down, they're supposed to kick on. If there is a poor quality air quality day that is putting vulnerable populations in danger, then those diesel generators kicking on are going to dramatically increase particulate matter and nitrogen oxides, which is really concerning. That can lead to people going to the emergency room with potentially fatal asthma attacks. In Tennessee, that is illegally operating diesel generators right next to a historically Black neighborhood in Tennessee. And the local community there is furious and pushing back really hard because thousands of diesel generators running around the clock has serious implications for anyone who's dealing with respiratory issues. So, next slide. Okay, we definitely need to talk about Virginia. Most of the world's internet traffic actually goes through the data center concentrations in Virginia. It is one of the places where we can get the best actual info on what's happening with the sector because it's where most of the stuff is going on. And it's tough. It's really tough for folks living in Virginia right now. Dominion Energy, which is the big utility, it is keeping fossil fuel plants online in other states in order to power the data center build out in Virginia. The water use issues there are starting to hit as well. So it took a FOIA because it wasn't readily available, but water use increased. You see that 250%, it's skyrocketing. There's local rivers where the entire daily flow is potentially going to be drawn by data center expansions. And then, I mentioned the air quality issues, and those thousands of diesel generators are potentially going to be given a green light by the state. I think they're still fighting about that air quality variance in Loudoun County, but it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. So this is There's been some great reporting specifically in Sierra Magazine about what's going on in Virginia, and we have a really strong chapter in Virginia that's been working on it. So if anyone is interested, I'll make sure that you have links to that reporting. It's quite stunning. Okay, next slide. Water. So water use is one aspect that I think has not been getting enough attention. The electricity use has almost been getting more, and I think that it's because the processes for tracking energy use and pricing is a little bit more systematic and transparent than water. So for example, in Michigan, we don't have the equivalent of a public service commission that oversees water. Water rate setting is set by utility, and there's some oversight and sometimes there's not, and it's just this massive patchwork. And so I think that probably happens in other states as well. But what we have seen with water use is pretty concerning. So in the Phoenix area, data centers were getting a sweetheart deal for their massive consumption of water. They were paying significantly less than residents were paying. And the debate about who should pay for such a scarce resource and what they should pay and how we should be using it, is this even an appropriate use of water when you're talking about a drought-stricken area? None of those questions are easily answered. Water use is definitely increasing. And it's taken pretty massive, expensive legal fights to even get a number associated with the amount of water that data centers are drawing. Here in Michigan, we fought really hard to make sure that any data centers that were getting those sales and use tax breaks are drawing from a large body of surface water, right? So the amount of water that they draw, if they're drawing it from the Great Lakes and it's in the basin, it is not going to have as an immediate dangerous impact as opposed to drawing groundwater, right? So there's parts of Michigan where if you have a massive groundwater draw, you actually are going to create a water shortage. So we worked really hard to at least get that in there. But again, there's not enough transparency and we're worried about it. There's also been some really interesting research, I believe at the University of Oklahoma. And again, I'll make sure that folks have a copy of a letter that we sent to the state legislature that references this. But the way that they treat the water to run through the cooling systems means that it actually can't be easily discharged and you are effectively removing it from the water cycle. That was floating around when we were debating water use during the last legislative session was this idea that it's evaporative cooling, so the water is just evaporating and coming back down, and we don't need to worry about it. It's not going to be a negative draw on the Great Lakes system. But as we saw with the Foxconn diversion, they're actually going to be diverting water outside of the basin in at least that instance, if not more. And according to the research at the University of Oklahoma, the water is, because of the way it's treated, it is actually effectively removed from the water cycle. So we need to get more information and we need more transparency on that to figure out the actual impacts. Okay, next slide. So in Michigan, so when I first did this presentation, these bills hadn't passed. But as I mentioned, we have our clean energy law. It requires us to get to 100% renewable energy by 2040. And there's, a couple different definitions in there. The reason why we dug in so hard is that our energy package has off-ramps, which means that if utilities cannot provide enough electricity to keep homes powered and businesses powered, then they can generate that electricity in any way, shape, or form that they need to if they can't meet it with renewable energy. So what that means is that if we have a massive increase in demand, then DTE can build gas plants. They're really excited about that and they want to do it. And they want, RNG gas to be the bedrock of their corporate model. And during the lame duck session, DTE, specifically it was DTE, worked really hard to whip Republican votes to outweigh all of the Democrats that were going to vote no in order to protect our renewable energy goals. And they were voting no because we were we were pushing for language that required tech companies to invest in around-the-clock renewable energy generation if they're going to build these things, right? So we weren't saying, no, we can't have data centers. We were saying we need to make sure that ratepayers aren't footing the bill. Companies are building their own renewable energy sources, and they're being responsible and transparent about water use. We did not get that language into the tax incentives that passed, and we are incredibly concerned about what is going to happen now that tech companies have access to their system of layering tax breaks for local communities, and they don't have the requirement to build out renewable energy to power their data centers. It's going to be a problem. And we've already seen it. So there's, the letter that I think Natalie has put in the chat. It references a Public Service Commission filing where Consumers Energy disclosed with the Public Service Commission that they are seeking a whole new rate structure for data centers. And they do cite data centers coming online as a reason why they are going to struggle to meet our renewable energy goals. So the exact thing that we were really worried about last session is in fact happening, and you can check out the Public Service Commission filings to get the details on that. Okay, next slide. So there are solutions. We can do this differently. There is a report here. We released it in September. It's called Demanding Better. I can make sure everyone has a copy of it. It's specifically focusing on electricity generation, and it outlines ways that tech companies, instead of creating a situation in which we're destroying our clean energy goals and not meeting them, they could actually be driving the entire sector to meet them even faster. So there were 12 different recommendations in the report. We are currently intervening in our own Public Service Commission, and we are encouraging everyone, around the country to get involved. Obviously, water conservation remains a big concern. We need to make sure, at a minimum, we've got more transparency about it, and we're not drawing from sensitive groundwater situations. And the ratepayer protections are going to continue to be a really big issue. So we'll continue intervening, and we need stronger laws as well in order to give the lawyers that are intervening the statutory tools they need to fight as hard as possible to close loopholes that leave regular Michiganders footing the bill for tech companies. So we haven't fixed it yet. I think that is the last slide. Let's see if there's one more, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes, that was the last slide. So if folks are interested, I see. Okay, so Cheryl is asking a question.
Christy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep,
you can go ahead.
No, you're tracking on it. You're good. You're good. I know your internet is not too stable, so we'll keep your video closed. But yeah, go ahead. And so folks can't see the question in the chat that just came to panelists and hosts, but asking about something happening in other communities. So particularly around crypto in New Hampshire, and also
that's interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I didn't mention the data centers that power crypto. I'm glad that someone brought it up. Those are different too. So crypto requires around-the-clock mining, right? I'm using air quotes. And so they operate these massive data centers. They'll either rent space or have their own. And they are particularly nasty neighbors. And I want to draw some attention to both Texas and Arkansas, because there's fantastic reporting of the health impacts for local communities that have these massive crypto server farms. And there's a reporter, Andrew Chow, who's just written a book. He was also on Science Friday a couple months ago talking about his research into this Texas town and the health impacts of the sound associated with the constant drone of both the servers themselves, because in order to get the electricity into a form that can be used by the servers, they have to go through this transformer, and it makes this high-pitched sound. I should be better explaining that, but an electrical engineer explained it to me, and I did not take careful enough notes. But anyway, it's a bad sound. That, on top of the constant whirring of fans, which can often be used, is having a really serious health impact on entire communities. There's starting to be more research, more reporting about it. And it seems to be singularly bad near crypto facilities. So figuring out and teasing out what that's all about, I think, is really important. For more information about the Wisconsin diversion, happy to send some stuff your way. But if you just Google Foxconn water diversion, Great Lakes compact, a bunch of stuff is going to pop up. And I will also dig up the information about the river in Virginia. Some very recent reporting on local water impacts is around the Susquehanna River, which is what 3 Mile Island draws from. And there was a community hearing about restarting 3 Mile Island, and advocates were working to put numbers on the draw from the Susquehanna River that's going to be associated with restarting 3 Mile Island, and another power plant that is going to be generating power for data centers. So the Susquehanna River might be a good place to look into as well. So I hope that was enough. And I'm happy to send along information about how other states are attempting to regulate this as well. They are looking to often go into rural areas, so I want to mention that too. So if you're in a rural area, keep an eye out. Frankly, I think they prey on struggling rural communities that are wowed by the idea of a big industrial tax base. And so they come and, pitch the business model in struggling places. Of course, they leave out the part that they're going to layer tax breaks in order to screw local communities even more. But we've seen that. It's been a pattern of behavior. So there's some great reporting from ProPublica on how the sales and use tax exemption in, I think it was the Washington state, ballooned into historically one of the biggest corporate giveaways ever in the whole state of Washington. So keep that critical lens on any pitches from tech companies coming to small rural places.
Thank you, Christy. That's super helpful. We have a couple questions also coming in about the role of nonprofits and universities sort of creating their own data centers. So they gave the example of Wayne State University recently signed an agreement to house a localized Google Cloud data center that serves Wayne State exclusively. What do you know about these? Is this similar issues? Yeah, anything you have to share?
Yeah, I think I haven't looked at the Wayne State one. The language that we were working to get into the sales and use tax exemptions is totally possible to put in any other sort of agreements, right? So my recommendation would be for anyone who's interested in doing AI right to look at mandating that tech companies that are providing, it's a kind of service, right? That they're doing it with an eye to water conservation, transparency, and generating renewable energy. So there's no reason why, Wayne State can't say, okay, Google, if you we need this, and we want to make sure that the, 80% of the electricity that this facility uses is generated from renewable sources that you're paying for. So they should do that. There's no reason not to, other than corporate profits and speed, right? They're in a race with each other. So that's part of the reason why tech companies are abandoning their own sustainability goals, because they're trying to beat out each other in developing the most powerful AI that they can. And again, without transparency, without the public understanding what the AI is going to be used for, and raises concerns.
Absolutely. I think a couple of these questions you anticipated, and I think spoke to the noise concerns and noise pollution and work being done around that. If you want to say, and you also did talk about the environmental justice implications of all of this in a couple of the examples that you gave, but I don't know if you want to say anything more about sort of how this is going to hit certain communities more than others.
Yeah. I think the around-the-clock diesel generators is particularly concerning. I think we need to really keep an eye on that. For folks that are not aware, right now in Michigan, the state of Michigan is actually choosing to exclude air quality data that would trigger more enforcement action. And specifically, they're excluding data that would say that Michigan is out of compliance with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. And that, first of all, it's not true. They're excluding data to say that. Second of all, when we have bad air quality days, which is highly likely to be a trend that continues for so many reasons, it usually can coincide with really bad weather and power outages. So we're really concerned about vulnerable low-income communities that are already overburdened with air pollution, dealing with hundreds, if not thousands, of diesel generators kicking on when there's a power outage. Places in Michigan where data centers might of this scale are under consideration are in Berrien County. So the restart of I think it's owned by Holtec now, the Palisades nuclear plant, that's for a data center, if folks aren't aware. So that's on deck, and, have some concerns about how the expansion of that facility might impact, in particular, Benton Harbor. In St. Clair County, I mentioned that DTE overbuilt its gas plant out there. And, that's very close to Canada's Chemical Valley. If you're not familiar with some of the cancer clusters in that part of the state, you should be. That's on the Canadian side of things. That's where a lot of that really nasty petrochemical industry expansion is, but air and water pollution don't actually respect international boundaries, so it's still going to be an issue over there. And what's interesting about St. Clair County is that local communities have actually been pushing back really hard and stopping DTE from going out and inviting a data center to set up shop. So that's interesting. There are potentially a few others. We heard up to 5. But the reporting around these is constricted by the fact that, to my knowledge, most of the people associated with these deals are signing non-disclosure agreements. So again, there's not enough transparency. So other than St. Clair County and Berrien County, possibly somewhere downriver, in Wayne County, there might be attempts to get data centers sited on brownfields. There's a very specific brownfield loophole in the sales and use tax exemption, so that's a place to keep an eye on. But these are all struggling communities with people that are bearing the brunt of historical contamination, ongoing air and water issues, and siting data centers without proper transparency, potentially with lots of backup diesel generators, is an issue. It's an issue. It's not right. On top of paying for it with higher utility bills, people are paying the health costs of dealing with externalized pollution.
Absolutely. Last few questions here as we round out. Not surprisingly, Michiganders want to talk about water. A couple questions about just how we manage and conserve in this moment, and also about toxic substances associated with the management of our water and these data center operations. I don't know if you have any other thoughts or suggestions on how to advocate on these issues.
Yeah, I think I do. So one of the lame duck casualties, and for folks that don't know, lame duck is the term that we apply to the legislative session after the election and before the new session starts, when you have a lot of legislators that are potentially not returning. We did not pass our water affordability package. And if we had, we would have had some ratepayer protections, at least on the water side of things. But we need to do that to deal with it so that we don't have low-income residents that already can't afford their water bills, essentially subsidizing the hookups that, trillion-dollar tech companies need. I don't know if they're worth $1 trillion yet, but we all know they're aiming for it. So that's a really big concern. We've heard that non-evaporative cooling is an option for tech companies to help conserve water. There are a variety of different systems in place. Tech companies don't love that because it would essentially require them to change things, and it's easier for them to not change things. But non-evaporative cooling might be a way to deal with water conservation for these centers. And transparency, I can't overstate the issues with transparency, right? So we need to make sure that when these companies are going in, that we get as much clarity as possible and mandate that they report what they're using. And so for anyone in a local community in Michigan that gets wind of a county deal or a city deal or whatever, showing up and pushing really hard for requirements for water transparency at the local level is an option, because we did not get it at the state level. I know that Senator Rosemary Bayer is currently working on a much bigger picture approach to industrial water users in Michigan and updating essentially it's like our Great Lakes Compact implementing legislation. And I think it's important for folks that are worried about water use in Michigan to be aware one of the many casualties of that kind of aggressive attack on our state agency is that we will not be appropriately mapping and tracking large water withdrawals if we zero out Eagle's budget. So it's the last thing that we should be doing when we're inviting large water users with massive tax breaks to come into the state of Michigan. We should not be gutting the state's ability to track large water use. Yeah, so transparency is a big issue there.
Thank you, Christy. We have 1 minute left. I do have final recommendations, thoughts. There's so many layers to this issue. And I think for many people, this is just eye-opening to understand that there's a lot of levers and a lot of policy guardrails that are possible. And you're working hard on all of these, but what should folks walk away knowing?
Yeah, I think local government can be incredibly powerful. So look at different intervention points aside from state and federal policy. I think that actually is a window of opportunity. Remember that every tool is a weapon if you hold it right. We can do AI the right way, or we can do what we're currently doing, which is not right. So keep that in mind. I want folks to understand that we can still really especially push back at the local level and get some protections in place while we're dealing with everything that we're dealing with in other spaces. So keep an eye out for that, keep pushing. And I want the push for data centers and their expansion without any guardrails is truly bipartisan. I want to be really crystal clear about that. DTE's pouring money into it. Fossil fuel companies are all about it because they can't wait to build gas plants we pay for. Democrats and Republicans are both getting this wrong. Governor Whitmer shouldn't have signed those bills. Democrats shouldn't have been pushing them without our protections. That was wrong. And every opportunity that you get, keep reminding decision makers, right? I think that the misinformation and the access that large corporations have because the amount of money that they throw at elections interferes with our ability to actually get in front of lawmakers and point to the best policies that help people. So watch out for candidates that start talking about how big tech data center expansion in Michigan is going to save our economy. I just heard the Genesee sheriff who's going to be running for governor. He went on for a serious amount of time about how he thinks that data center expansion is going to save Michigan's economy recently. So it's not just the public's perception that needs to catch up, it's legislators too. So if you are able to get in front of decision makers and flag this as a concern, we need to do this right. We can't just let these companies come in, force us to pay for everything for proprietary tech that who knows how it's going to be used against us. We got to do things differently. So don't let decision makers off the hook, ask hard questions of them, and get involved at the local level. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much, Christy, for your time. We're over. We're going to call it at this point. There are links in the chat. Hopefully you snag them to hear about future R&Rs and links to past R&Rs.